So the whole call today is about our menstrual cycle and how it affects us at different times of the month in terms of our energy, how it can impact on training and appetite, and how to work with it instead of fighting it. As always, my aim with this is to give you some practical tips, but not leave you feeling overwhelmed. And specifically for this one, this is really from my point of view about sharing knowledge, and I definitely don't want it to feel like this is homework, because this is sort of an added bonus over and above the things that we talk about from day to day. So, in terms of how our cycle works, as you probably already know, we have two hormones that basically run everything, which is estrogen and progesterone, and they rise and fall and create our monthly cycle. And that pattern then creates four phases, each one of which has an impact on our energy, our mood, our appetite, and for us specifically, our training. And that's why one week a workout can feel really easy, and in another week it can feel impossible. And that's nothing to do with our fitness level or the amount of strength we have. It is simply about hormones. And neither are we inconsistent. We are, in fact, just cyclical. So tonight is about finding out more about that. So, in terms of the four phases, period, again, these days are all rough and everyone will vary from person to person. But when we have our period, that is roughly going to be days 1 to 6 potentially, and that's when we have our reset. The period afterwards, so our post period, roughly around day 7 to 13, that's our superwoman window. The third one, so around ovulation, is the connector when we're more sociable. And then we have the fourth one, which is our premenstrual phase, which is roughly around day 22 onwards. And that's when everything sort of starts to wind down. And as I said before, these numbers are only a guide because every cycle will be different. Just to give you a bit of visual representation of how things change during the month. So you can see that when we come towards the end of our period, our estrogen then starts to rise in the period ahead of ovulation, which happens at around day 14. Estrogen then will drop off and that will fall away as progesterone then sort of takes over and climbs at around peaking at around day 21. But how does that impact on the way that we feel? So if we look in more detail, first of all, at the stage where we do actually have our period, so how we likely feel in those weeks is that our energy may dip or come in waves. We might feel fiery, then we might feel sluggish, and intuition and sensitivity can be high in those periods. In terms of training, I would always say let your symptoms lead. Obviously, the severity of symptoms varies wildly from person to person. So if you tend to find that you generally feel okay, then I would always say carry on with your training as much as you possibly can. If, however, you're on the other side and you do find that you do find your period really debilitating, then of course opt for more gentle movement and walks on those days and then return into normal sessions as you feel able to. In terms of food, the focus really here is obviously because we're losing blood, we're losing some of our iron. So it's really important to consider in this particular week to be including our dark leafy greens and red meats, things like that, so that we can replace what we're losing. And in terms of mindset, this is generally a good week for decluttering plans, but not necessarily starting new ones. Then in the post period or superwoman window, this is where we can have more drive, focus, and confidence, and all that starting to climb with our estrogen level. In terms of training, that means we can typically push harder, lift heavier, have faster sessions, be more confident about trying new things, and is probably where progress will feel the most easy. From a food point of view, our appetite is normally steady, so it might be that you find fresh or lighter meals tend to appeal here, but importance, as always, on keeping protein up to support our training. And from a mindset point of view, decisions and projects and starting new things will all generally come easier in this stage. As we move on to phase three, so thinking more about ovulation, this is generally where we feel at our most sociable, communicative, empathetic, and we're at our best with people. And so, if you enjoy training with friends, that's probably a week when you will find that you enjoy that the most. Our training performance should still be strong in this week. And thinking about food, this is where fibre will be really important to help clear away the peak of estrogen and get rid of anything that's left out of our body. The one thing to watch out for here in terms of mindset is because we're so sociable in this period and empathetic that we can sort of put ourselves to the back of the queue as we say yes to everyone else and put their needs first. And that can then mean that potentially we could risk dropping our own routine there to help others. So that's just something to be mindful of. Um, Then, when we come to the fourth and premenstrual phase, so how this feels. So, our energy, as I'm sure we're all very aware of, will tend to withdraw at this point. We get shorter with our patience, cravings rise, and it feels like our body's asking us to slow down. So, in terms of training, as I sort of said for the period week, you can dial the intensity down. But again, I would really very much always be led by how you feel at the time. I tend to personally approach all of my training sessions in the same way. I try to approach them all with positivity. However, if I do have, and I definitely do have those sessions where sometimes I feel like I can't lift as heavy as I could the week before, or it just feels like hard work, I just don't beat myself up about it and I will accept that it's just not a great session or a great week for me. So it's about sort of shrinking that standard and expectation, but not sort of approaching it from the point of view of I'm just not going to bother. From a food point of view, we can expect cravings, but if we keep up with our protein and fibre, then that will help to manage hunger levels. And we can also think about how to plan satisfying snacks rather than grazing all evening. And in terms of mindset, this is a period typically of reflection and review, but save big plans for that superwoman window. So that's why you can have the same plan, but in a different week, have completely different results. So as I said, kind of, you can sort of have a gym session that might have felt wonderful on day 10 and then feel impossible on day 26. And again, that's just down to hormones and not any reflection on your strength. And if you did have a week where potentially you felt that like you fell off the wagon, that was most probably the premenstrual week with cravings going up, energy coming down. So naturally, things are going to feel harder in that week. But understanding that pattern can help avoid sort of that feeling of fighting it every time. So a few more sort of extra details. Thinking about symptoms that we might experience, these are some ideas on how you can fix them. So if you are somebody that suffers from cramps, then magnesium can be good here. So that looks like dark chocolate, nuts, leafy greens, and oily fish. If you suffer from bloating, then our potassium-rich foods like bananas, avocado, and spinach, plus fibre from our vegetables, fruit, and whole grains can help. If you're a headache sufferer like me, then it's important, of course, to stay hydrated, and you can think about trying beetroot, spinach, or watermelon in the days before your period. And for low mood, vitamin B6, and especially alongside the magnesium options that I talked about. But as I said, I really don't want this to feel like homework. But if you are somebody that suffers in particular from one or more of these things, then potentially this could be some ideas on things that you could try to help manage those symptoms if you haven't before. In terms of cravings, these are real, definitely. So our goal is to satisfy them, but not to fear them, and definitely not just to sort of continuously, endlessly graze. So the important thing will always come back to what I strive for throughout the whole month, and that's to build our meals around protein and fibre, because the fuller that we are, then that we're going to be more satisfied and hopefully help to manage cravings in the first place. But it is so important, and I say this for the whole month, to plan treats in. So if you're somebody that does enjoy having a little snack, maybe it's in the evening, once your day's finished, just keep room in your calories so that you do have space to have a snack that you'll enjoy, and choose foods that are really sort of satisfying and can help deliver a job for you in terms of sort of protein and fibre and so on. So things like dark chocolate, Greek yogurt, berries, oats, rather than sort of packets of crisps, I suppose, which aren't necessarily going to be doing a great job of actually satisfying you because the nutrient level won't be as good. Thinking about perimenopause, I know so many of us on the programme are at this stage of life. Of course, our cycle here can completely change. So it might be shorter, it might be longer, or we might be in the stage where we're missing periods altogether. That doesn't mean that we're not still having the effects of the rising and falling hormones, but the map just sort of blurs. So what's most important here is to track how you feel, and to have that in mind rather than trying to follow the numbers that I shared at the start of the presentation. And of course, having those irregular cycles just means that those basics that I've talked about, so getting your protein in, getting your fibre in, and making sure that you consistently have those in your diet, your strength training, priority on sleep, and managing stress will all help to try and keep things as level as possible for us. That being said, they're not the whole answer. And if you do feel that your symptoms are causing a wider disruption around your life, then obviously that's the time to reach out to a GP. But what's a great place to start is with tracking. So, again, if you're in perimenopause and perhaps your cycle is all over the place, this is especially important here. So start tracking these 4 things. So when you do obviously get a period, I'm sure you do that anyway, but track every day. What's your energy level like? What's your mood like? What's your appetite like? And you can easily do that by just using the Notes app on your phone, or anywhere where you'll find that easy to do. And after kind of 2 or 3 cycles, hopefully you'll then start to see what your individual pattern is, which you can then apply to the principles within this document. And then thinking about training, as I said, personally, I try and approach my training the same every session, but I'm not hard on myself if for any reason that session doesn't feel particularly good, and I'll just understand that it is likely hormones or how well I've slept, etc. I'll just move on and then crack on with the next session. So having said that, we know that our best weeks for training are probably going to be the post-period and ovulation stage. And then in our premenstrual and period week, that's when we might find things tougher and where we might need to shrink the standard. But just make sure that we're protecting that non-negotiable minimum. And that might be that if you can't get a strength session in, that you can still perhaps go out for a gentle walk, that kind of thing. And remember, this is just a guide and definitely not something else to fit in or another rule that you feel you've got to live by. Keep it simple. So, as I said, you don't need 4 different diets for each week of the cycle. The anchors shouldn't change. So, protein, plants, water, and being consistent is most important here. And as I said, this is not homework, so it is really just a bonus layer. So if there's something in there that you think could work to manage your symptoms, then give it a go. But if you only remember 3 things, it's make sure we're pushing after our period, managing our cravings, and tracking how we feel. Oops. Keep skipping on 2 slides for some reason. So you one job this week, I'd say just start tracking. If this is something that you feel like having a go at to help you understand your cycle a bit more, then as I said, the 4 things to track would be your period, your energy, mood, and appetite levels, and that shouldn't really take more than 30 to 60 seconds a day. And over the next sort of 2 to 3 months, it means that you'll actually have a map for your cycle. And that concludes the coaching for this week's call. Next week's call will be back on Tuesday at 7 p.m. and that will be looking at strength training in a little more detail and looking specifically at muscle and why it is your longevity insurance.